Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 200, The Honeymoon Killers, directed by Leonard Kastle, 1969. I actually got this as part of a package deal that the Criterion store put out, I think in 2008 or so, because there were a bunch of recent films that came out that were related largely in subject matter to some films that Criterion put out on DVD. So these are all titles that I was interested in getting anyway, and I figured, and it was a baggage deal, why not? Easy way to add several titles. This also included General D. I Min Dada and F for Fake. So The Honeymoon Killers was included because of the 2006 film Lonely Hearts, and they're all used the same source material, which were the honeymoon. Sorry, not the Honeymoon Killers, the Lonely Hearts Killers, as they were known at the time, Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez, and they were executed in Sing Sing prison in March 1951. So. It looked interesting as far as just the description, but I didn't know quite what to expect, and I ended up admiring the film in a lot of ways. And there are two major reasons for this. The first is I consider this to be, like Carnival of Souls, a B-plus film. Yes, I think of it as a B film because of the relative inexperience of the people involved and their limited resources, and it's not executed perfectly. There's still some rough edges to it. But there's a lot more positives than there are negatives. I would say the combination of the writing and the performances, the writing, directing, performances, the photography, and the fact that it was doing more, that there was more to it than just the straightforward story, gives it a certain charm, and it's quite interesting and also very unsettling. The other big reason why I like this film is because this is an example of a writer-director who was once a music composer. Leonard Kastle was trained as a composer. He went to the Curtis Institute and Juilliard and was known as composing operas. In fact, one of his operas aired through NBC, and it was a opera about Brigham Young, Deseret, and and I have personal stock in this because I myself am trained in music, but I would like to get into film, and music is my only background. And he confirmed some suspicions that I had, and in having made a short film myself, this has finally been confirmed. But having a musical sense really does help in your filmmaking, because you are attentive to. And particularly with opera, you're attentive to dramatic structures. You're aware of things like tone and pace and a sense of progression. You start at one point and then you end up somewhere else. And those are useful. Those are very useful to think about when it comes to filmmaking, and it is something that, if you've worked on it before in music, you can translate that into filmmaking. And if you've worked with operas, it's really not that different, since opera itself is a combination of music and theater, and cinema is a combination of a variety of other arts. So, in other words, if Leonard Kastle can do it, then so could I. That's really how I take from it. The film itself was made as a response to Bonnie and Clyde, and it was something that what Leonard Kastle felt strongly, and also his producer Warren Steibel, what they didn't like about the film was just how overly stylized the crime and violence was, to the point where they felt that it romanticized crime, and they felt that no, crime isn't really like that. It's ugly, it's gritty, it's messy, and they wanted a crime film that had a little bit more grit. And so for starters, they looked at the Lonely Hearts Killers case as a starting point. And I know that if you look at the two, there are some creative liberties taken and between the two. And I don't pretend that while the Honeymoon Killers is certainly has its basis in the Lonely Hearts Killers, I don't take this to be that this is a true actual account. This is much in the same way that I treat Fargo. That yes, there is that true story disclaimer, but it's really not about the actual story. It's more about other things. And really, the Lonely Hearts Killers case was just it certainly provided the through line, and it gave you the much needed sequence of events. But what Kastle did in writing the script and then in turn directing it was imbued it with a little bit more to it. So it's not just a straight retelling of what had happened. I mean, for starters, I mean, his only basis was the court records, and everybody who was involved were dead. Beck and Fernandez were electrocuted, and obviously everybody else and whoever they killed, they were dead. So you couldn't really get any. You don't really know for sure what things happened, and plus there's one of the things you get from this is the use of lies. There's lots of lying going on, and it starts with little lies, and then it starts compounding and creating a snowball effect into something where you end up killing a lot of people, and you yourself end up electrocuted. So I think this is a case where the creative liberties taken with the original story or the original source material is not just for the sake of doing creative liberties or taking artistic license, but rather I think it's quite befitting with the theme. If they were lying to themselves, why shouldn't I, as the filmmaker, be able to do some lies myself? So anyway, so this film was made as a response to it was made as a response against Bonnie and Clyde, and it now having not seen Bonnie and Clyde myself, I can imagine, based on what was described of that film and then what you get out of the Honeymoon Killers, is kind of tells you enough. With the Honeymoon Killers, here it's black and white photography, which gives it more of a newsreel feel to it, and it's certainly adds to the grit and realism of the whole thing. The aesthetic itself is quite minimal. I mean, in addition to shooting it in black and white, the photography is not overtly flashy. There's a few moments where it's handheld, but really it's just there's a lot of lockdown shots. Sometimes the camera pans and tilts a bit to follow action, but really it's very minimal, minimalist cinematography. And then also relatedly, the production design is also very minimal. There's not a whole lot of there's not a lot to it, and actually that's not really the point. The point is not it's not so much the mise en scène. It's more in the characters, and that really comes through, and that makes it interesting. And the cinematography and the production design are just there to complement that and to support that. it's less about the crimes themselves. Like I said, it definitely provides the structure for the whole film, but it's less about the crimes themselves. You don't get a lot of gory details. In fact, some of the goriest moments are just they're simply done. They're not. There's no gruesome close-ups or anything of that sort. It was. So the attention is not so much on the crimes themselves, but it's more about these characters, and particularly of Martha and Ray, and the sort of dysfunctional romantic relationship they have, built and supported on lies. Not exact. Yeah, there's give and take, but it's done with some reluctance on both parties, and there's a lot of tension, and you just wonder, why did this relate? It's one of those things where you think, they're made for each other, and they're also not made for each other, and that's what you. And so in that sense, it's probably it's probably the oddest love story ever told. There just happens to be a lot of crime put into it as well, and also I think there's an element of social commentary in there, and particularly about American culture, of not really so much of the 40s, which is where all these crimes took place. I believe the earliest started. I believe they met in 1947, and they were finally caught in 1949, and then you had a long trial, and then finally in 1951 they were executed. There's not so much of and this is why I think that there's another reason for the liberties is that it's not really a period piece. You don't get the feeling that this is 40s. You actually get more of the late 60s than you do of the late 40s. And if anything from the late 40s is examined, it's done through the lens of someone in the late 60s, where there's a lot more critique of that culture and mindset. There's and even Leonard Kastle himself said there was a bit of intentional commentary made on the American First idea and overt patriotism on a couple of the characters here and there, and also just the fact that Martha and Ray met through a Lonely Hearts Club, and that's the pervading thing. Just this notion that you have to be coupled off, that you have to find somebody. I mean, okay, basically the story itself, really, in a nutshell, is Martha Beck, played by Shirley Stoller, is a very single nurse who is lonely. She's overweight, and she's just socially desperate. And a friend of hers puts her into a friendship club, and in so doing, she ends up meeting Ray from New York, and there's this great, lovely correspondence, and he shows up, and the seeds of romance were strangely planted, and Ray himself uses the Lonely Hearts, or the Friendship Club, for his own schemes of mostly to rob. So he's through and through a con artist, and I guess I guess it is a way of meeting chicks, because he has some of that as well. But he's through and through a con artist, and eventually Martha is told this, and she accepts this, probably largely out of desperation. She's even willing to commit suicide for him, and so you can see right there. There's something very dysfunctional about the whole relationship, and it's fascinatingly macabre and quite disturbing. And you can almost label this as a dark comedy in some respects. And like I said, it's the most oddly told it's the most odd love story ever told. So, but again, I think that's what gives it its charm. It's not just a straight, just, oh, it's all about the honey. It's all about the, sorry. Okay, the thing about the title, it was an addition after the fact from the distributors. It was originally called Dear Martha, but then when the distributors were put it out, they wanted to use the title The Honeymoon Killers. And in fact, the trailer, I saw the trailer for this, and it makes it look more sleazier or pulpy than it actually is, which I think is a bit unfair to it. I mean, it makes it seem like it's a sensational, like, ooh, see this horrid crime, but it really isn't. And boy, I think a lot of people were disappointed. Maybe some people came into it with low expectation. They thought, oh, this is what it is. Okay, it's not that bad. In fact, Truffaut called this one of his favorite American films that he had seen. Oh yeah, and actually, speaking of Truffaut, I think that also kind of gives it. I mean, like with Carnival of Souls, Herc Harvey and John Clifford said that they wanted to make a film that had the look of a Bergman, and the feel of a Cocteau. For Leonard Kastle's case, his starting point was he liked the films of Fellini and Pasolini and Truffaut, and I think knowing that helped inform a lot of the look and feel of it, and why it has that sort of charm to it. It has that nod to the Nouvelle Vague, and actually the Nouvelle Vague themselves was a nod to Italian neorealism. With Pasolini, he's actually second wave Italian neorealism, whereas the Nouvelle Vague is more the first wave of neorealism, like Visconti, like early Visconti and Rossellini and De Sica. And Pasolini came a little bit later, so there you go. So yeah, there is a quite a charm to it, and again the fact that there were limited resources. Warren Steibel, the producer, was known as a television producer. This was his first and ends up being his only feature film that he ever produced. And for Leonard Kastle, he was an opera composer, but he found himself writing the script, and eventually he had to direct the film, which leads into some other interesting tidbits in regards to the film. Originally, the director for this production was Martin Scorsese, but then you could say he was whether he was fired or left. Actually, I'm sure it was both at the same time, that he was both fired and he left the production due to creative differences. Leonard Kastle recalled that he had spent the first day working with the cinematographer Oliver Wood a long time on shooting this beer can, which was not in the script at all, but he wanted to shoot this beer can because it would help set the mood, and Kastle was like, what are you doing? Like, what does this beer can have to do with anything? But I'm sure Martin Scorsese's gotten over it. If he hasn't, then I don't know what to do. I don't know what to suggest. But another interesting tidbit, I mentioned the cinematographer Oliver Wood. He had done a film prior to this, so this was fairly early in his career, and then he went on to have an even more interesting career. And I dare you to go to IMDb, look up Oliver Wood, and see what films he has done. And you can react with delight or fear when appropriate. Another interesting tidbit, this is also, I think this is the first appearance of Doris Roberts. She plays Martha's friend Bunny, who gets her onto this whole little escapade. So, yes, she has always loved Raymond. And then, also, another interesting little tidbit is the music that's used is largely from Mahler. Now, for a film that didn't want to romanticize crime, it's interesting that you picked probably the most romantic of late romantic composers. But in a way, it actually makes sense, and it doesn't make the film in any way hypocritical. Because I think the story itself is quite romantic, and Leonard Kastle used the word overbaked, and I would agree with that. And it's just one of those things that just it complements it really well. I think it gives it a kind of strange intensity that is quite fitting. And let's see other. Now, as far as it as a Criterion release, yes, I think it deserves to be on the shelf. It's not one of those like, what is that title doing here? One other thing I really like and I noticed this in rewatching it, was the package design. I noticed kind of I don't know if this will come through. Yep. It just eerily reminds me of Married to the Sea and those e-card memes. So here you go. You got some more motivation to make up more snarky statements. And this carries over in the menu design as well. It's made to look like an old 40s advert spread. And then finally, I would say the one big mark against the film, and one of the reasons why it is, while it's a great B film, it's still a B film, and that is the audio quality. And I attribute, you could say, well, they just probably had cheap sound recording equipment, and that could very well be, but in hearing it again, I think it's more of the condition of the print. The print was probably not stored in the best way, because I mean it's a B film. It's like, who cares? So it's that kind of neglect that affected the quality of the print. And the reason why I say that it's more based on the print, because even the Mahler cues suffer in audio quality. It's very, very harsh highs, a very muddled mid-range, and the sound is either too low or too loud, and there's some distortions and even some modulations as well. Thankfully, there are subtitles, so if you can't, I mean, it doesn't get totally in the way of the dialogue. I mean, you can understand it for the most part. I would say maybe 96 or 7% of the dialogue, or maybe like 98. It's clear, you can hear it, but it's just not, the fidelity is not particularly great. So I think that's the one mark I would say against it. But I mean, other than that, there is a very disturbing charm to the film. The fact that you're seeing this very dysfunctional romantic relationship that involves lying and conning people and eventually even killing people, is just quite, it's quite disturbing. So there you go. The Honeymoon Killers. And until next time, take care.